Crowds once counted as high as 150,000 jammed every inch of St. Peter's Square for Pope Leo XIV's very first public Mass. Witnesses expected a standard blessing. Instead, the new pontiff locked eyes with the cameras and dropped a single, jarring line. "I think of families suffering from war." Suddenly, Gaza's destroyed streets and Ukraine's frozen trenches felt only a heartbeat away from the cobblestones of Rome. Why does that sentence matter? Because 5 days earlier, the same pope had stunned diplomats by describing parents cradling lifeless children and demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, language some insiders called too blunt for Vatican protocol. Behind the applause, Israeli envoys were said to lodge quiet complaints, while Eastern European bishops worried the Holy See might be edging toward open confrontation with Moscow. If Leo keeps speaking this plainly, will he become the peacemaker the world begs for, or the lightning rod critics can't ignore? Yet a different battle is already raging closer to home. Vatican ledgers show a structural deficit nearing 100 million euros and a vast pension gap, figures that forced Leo's team to float fresh salary cuts for cardinals just 3 weeks into his reign. Reports claim 2 senior prelates threatened resignation, warning the Pope not to balance the books on apostolic backs. For a former Chicago soup kitchen volunteer, slashing stipends while preaching charity could either prove his integrity or ignite the curial pushback that toppled reformers before him. That's the tightrope. One American-born pontiff talking peace to warlords and frugality to princes of the church, while millions watch to see which side bends first. So how did Leo XIV jump from Midwest parish halls to the world's most impossible job? Stick around, because the story behind his bold words, hidden battles, and whispered rumors is only beginning. And what happens next could rewrite more than just Vatican balance sheets. St. Peter's Square had not seen color like this in years. Kites painted as every nation's flag bobbed over 50,000 pilgrims, while choirs from 5 continents passed tambourines hand to hand. Pope Leo XIV chose no bulletproof limo that morning. He rolled in an open jeep, high-fiving children perched on parents' shoulders. Cameras caught one boy slipping him a crayon drawing that read, "Peace is my superpower." For a moment, Rome felt 9 years old again. When the applause finally ebbed, Leo went straight to the line that would headline newspapers: "Our families are the cradle of humanity's future." The phrasing mattered. He wasn't speaking to theologians in Latin. He was talking to living rooms on every time zone, calling households small domestic churches where the gospel first learns to breathe. Each sentence landed like a sparkler, brief, bright, impossible to ignore. He pivoted next to grandparents, naming them keepers of memory, who can turn fear into wisdom. Wrinkles flashed on the jumbo screens. Entire bleachers of gray hair stood and waved scarves, some wet with tears. Then, just as the square settled, Leo's tone sobered. "I think of families suffering from war," he said, ticking off Gaza, Ukraine, and every land where childhood ends too soon. The hush was electric. Even the choir stopped mid-note. Those 13 words rippled far beyond the Vatican walls. Reporters scrambled to know whether he would name aggressors or broker talks. Diplomats checked phones for any private messages. Meanwhile, observers whispered that the new pontiff had just redrawn the map, linking baby strollers in Rome to bomb shelters thousands of miles away. But behind the cheers lurked unease. Could such blunt compassion tip already fragile negotiations in Gaza and Kyiv? That tension and the swirl of back-channel complaints it sparked is where our story turns next, into the making of a peacemaker who might be pushing too hard, too fast. Just 5 days before the Jubilee crowd roared, Leo XIV had stood beneath the same colonnade, voice low, and painted a picture no diplomat dared: parents cradling lifeless children in darkened stairwells. He demanded an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and a humanitarian corridor in eastern Ukraine. No conditions, no polite pauses. The words ricocheted through embassies like shrapnel. Israeli envoys, rumors suggest, drafted a terse note calling the appeal imbalanced, while Kremlin-friendly media mocked the Pope for meddling in sovereign affairs. In Vatican corridors, aides whispered that a few cardinals feared Leo's bluntness might torch the fragile back channels Rome has nursed for decades. Yet to millions watching live streams, the speech felt less like politics and more like a desperate prayer from a man who had washed refugee feet on the Greek Isle of Lesbos long before he wore white. He didn't quote treaties or recite casualty counts. He told listeners to imagine bedtime stories drowned out by rocket sirens. That intimacy, naming nightmares rather than nations, turned a press conference into a plea no one could shrug off. Critics countered that such moral thunder risks unintended fallout. One veteran negotiator warned on late-night radio that commanders grow twice as stubborn when a pontiff calls them out on global TV. Meanwhile, social media flared with speculation. Was Leo angling to become the first pope since John XXIII to draft a public peace plan? Or was he cornering warring capitals so they, and not he, would bear blame for the next civilian tragedy? Whatever the strategy, the backlash arrived almost instantly. Anonymous Vatican sources leaked that funding for a proposed papal trip to Kiev had evaporated after donors grew nervous about political blowback. That isn't just a scheduling snag. The Holy See's finances are already hemorrhaging red ink, and every canceled pledge slices deeper. And that's the next front Leo XIV must face, because while he pleads for peace abroad, a storm of unpaid bills and shrinking coffers is roaring inside the Vatican walls. When Pope Leo XIV walked into the Apostolic Palace for his first finance briefing, the balance sheet looked less like a ledger and more like a disaster drill. An €83 million operating shortfall for 2024 and a pension fund hole insiders now peg at well over €600 million. Money owed to gardeners, archivists, even the Swiss Guard. His answer was blunt. Slash discretionary budgets by 15%, freeze new hires, and, most explosive, extend the 10% pay cut that Pope Francis had imposed on cardinals in 2021 until the books show black ink. The announcement leaked within hours. One Italian daily splashed a headline that read simply, "The Pope's Austerity Acts." Reports claim two senior curial cardinals marched into Leo's office the next morning, threatening to resign, warning that deeper cuts would cripple pastoral diplomacy. Vatican watchers noted that similar resistance dogged Francis earlier this year when he floated trimming embassy budgets and seeking outside donors. Whether the threat was real or rhetorical, it exposed the unspoken fear. If Leo can't plug the holes fast, Rome may soon struggle to fund everything from missionary grants to museum restorations. But the stakes run deeper than salaries. Lay employees whisper that pension reform could postpone their retirement by a decade, while economists warn that relying on Holy Year tourism alone won't rescue a system bleeding cash since the pandemic. Leo XIV now faces a choice every reformer dreads: cut cherished programs or find fresh revenue without selling the soul of the Church. And as he sharpens that balance sheet scalpel, another controversy smolders just below the surface: a debate over who may preach, who may preside, and how far Leo is willing to bend on the question of women at the altar. Section 4. Vow of Poverty, Palace of Marble. Approximately 2 minutes. Robert Francis Prevost grew up in a red brick two-flat on Chicago's far south side, sweeping the floor of his parish soup kitchen before he was tall enough to see over the counter. Augustinian friars drilled into him the rule of common life: own nothing, share everything. In Peru's Andean highlands, he stretched that rule to its limit, opening kitchens for families fleeing guerrilla violence and sleeping on the sacristy floor when the rectory roof leaked. That biography made headlines on May 8th when the conclave chose him as history's first American pope, and the first Augustinian ever to wear the fisherman's ring. Overnight, the man who once pawned his wristwatch to buy rice for parishioners was handed keys to a 1,000-room palace, a bulletproof Mercedes, and a $520,000 gold signet. Suddenly, vows of poverty and corridors of Carrara marble had to coexist under the same white zucchetto. So far, Leo XIV is sending mixed signals. Tabloids crow that he's entitled to €30,000 a month in personal stipends, yet Chicago gossip sites insist he's already signed those checks over to Caritas. Meanwhile, the Italian press reports he will move back into the traditional papal apartment, the very suite his predecessor left dark for 12 years, reviving images of velvet salons and Renaissance frescoes that Francis set aside for a modest guesthouse room. Critics ask whether an apartment swap undercuts his talk of austerity. Supporters say a pope can preach humility from any address if the doors stay open to the poor. Leo simply smiles and quotes St. Augustine, "Possess only what lets you love more." But even the warmest smile can't soften the storm gathering beyond his front gate. Survivors demanding justice, theologians demanding change, and a decades-old question: will the Church finally let women step into roles it once barred? Long before Leo XIV can broker peace abroad, he must confront a war inside the Church, one fought with courtroom filings, survivor testimonies, and theological manifestos. Just hours after white smoke crowned him Pope, Snap and other survivor networks unrolled banners outside Castel Sant'Angelo demanding a zero-tolerance pope and a global truth commission for clergy abuse. "They chose him, now prove he's clean," read one sign, a pointed reference to Chicago-era decisions critics call tone-deaf. Reports cite a 2000 case in which then Bishop Prevost allegedly approved housing a barred priest near a school, charges the Vatican denies, but survivors insist still need daylight. Within the Apostolic Palace, pressure mounts. Leaked memos say Leo is weighing an independent tribunal with lay voting rights, an idea canon lawyers laud, yet veterans warn could trigger open revolt among bishops who fear outside scrutiny. Survivors are unmoved. They want binding rules, not pilot programs. If Leo stalls, advocates vow to march during this year's synod session and broadcast victims' stories on TikTok Live, a digital protest impossible to corral. But another flashpoint steals equal oxygen: women's ordination. 8 months ago, the doctrinal chief told the synod it was not the time for female deacons, shelving decades of debate, yet many delegates left convinced the next pope could reopen the file. Now, think pieces swarm Catholic media. Will America's first pontiff break the glass chalice? Speculation spikes because Leo has promoted women to chancery posts in Peru and Chicago, yet in private letters, he reportedly warned against sacramental shortcuts. The divide is raw. Reform groups hail him as a potential game-changer. Traditionalists brand the very discussion a Trojan horse for schism. One Argentine bishop summed up the tension: if he green-lights women at the altar, half the curia will cheer, and half may pack their bags. For now, Leo walks a tightrope, hinting at new forms of service, while never uttering the explosive word ordination. Abuse tribunals on one flank, deaconesses on the other. Either decision could define his legacy before year's end. And just as critics sharpen their tweets, Leo reaches for an unlikely ally, the global press corps, who will broadcast his every triumph or misstep. May 25th marked the 59th World Day of Social Communications, and Pope Leo XIV used the occasion to flatter and warn the journalists crowding the Vatican press hall. He praised every reporter who risks deadlines to keep families informed, then slipped an pointed caveat: truth is oxygen, distortion is poison. That sentence landed in a digital minefield. Since his election, AI generated deepfakes of Leo, from a phony endorsement of a South American strongman to a fake TikTok where he allegedly raps doctrinal slogans, have ricocheted across the web. Catholic blogs cataloged more than 2,000 counterfeit clips in 3 weeks, some so lifelike that veteran Vatican correspondents did double takes. One viral fake even spoofed the Regina Coeli blessing, prompting anxious pilgrims to ask priests if the Pope had really called for an asteroid deflection novena. Insiders say the pontiff's media team is drafting a motu proprio, an executive decree, aimed at restoring moral authority in the age of synthetic speech. Leaks claim the document will require Catholic broadcasters to watermark live papal feeds and bar diocesan accounts from posting AI voiceovers without a warning label, Tech firms, intrigued, have already offered blockchain solutions. Traditionalists grumble about digital Pharisee rules. Critics, meanwhile, remember the Vatican's own rocky record on transparency. As recently as 2023, officials threatened legal action against an Italian newspaper that published leaked abuse trial transcripts, hardly a beacon of oxygen. Reporters now wonder, will Leo champion open press freedoms or tighten the spigot in the name of accuracy? The Pope's answer could decide whether the Church becomes a rare lighthouse in a fog of misinformation or just another institution pleading for fact checks after each hoax. On Saturday, while pundits fretted over budgets and deep fakes, Pope Leo XIV turned the spotlight to 15 women whose courage once silenced Soviet rifles. In Marki, Poland, the Church beatified Sister Krzysztofa Klomfas, and 14 companions of the Congregation of St. Catherine, Virgin and Martyr, nurses and teachers slain in 1945 as the Red Army swept west. Eyewitness files describe how the sisters refused evacuation, barricaded a children's ward, and shielded patients with their own bodies. During Sunday's Regina Coeli, Leo recounted their last stand in one pinpoint sentence. They persevered in service to the sick and orphans, even when hate marched through the door. The square fell silent. Pilgrims absorbed the image of habits stained with blood, medicine bottles rattling under artillery thunder. Then the Pope drew a direct line to the present. May their witness strengthen every woman who risks her life for love today. For critics, accusing Leo of foot-dragging on women's roles, the subtext rang loud. He was elevating female heroism to center stage, canon law arguments or not. Historians note that the nuns' mission hospital flew a white flag marked with a red cross, yet soldiers stormed it anyway, enraged at the sisters' refusal to abandon the wounded. One died clutching a rosary, another shielding an infant. Their common crime was fidelity to vows no gun could annul. Reports claim Soviet commanders later sealed documents on the massacre, forcing survivors to keep quiet for decades, until Polish archivists unearthed testimony that sparked the beatification cause. By honoring them now, Leo XIV reframed martyrdom as a living challenge. What injustices do we shrug off today because resistance feels too dangerous? And if a handful of cloistered nurses could stare down an army, what excuse does the rest of the world have for indifference? That question leads directly to our final chapter, because rumors swirling through Vatican hallways hint that Leo's next move, an unprecedented family and peace encyclical, could press every government on earth to answer it. Crowds erupted when Leo XIV spoke of war-torn families, but applause can't patch destroyed roofs. He has hurled moral thunder at Gaza and Kiev, cut cardinals' pay to plug a Vatican deficit, lived an Augustinian vow inside rooms frescoed by Raphael, weighed tribunals for shattered survivors, stared down AI deepfakes, and lifted 15 forgotten nuns onto history's tallest pedestal, all in barely a month. Each move widened the circle of people who either hail him as a 21st century John the 23rd or fear he's sprinting toward a cliff no pontiff has ever crossed. Now, a draft encyclical flickers on his desk like a lit fuse. If Pacem in Familia truly links nursery lullabies to peace treaties and labels missiles blood money, chancelleries will quake, and diocesan budgets might too. Some whisper he's naive. Others swear he's exactly the disruptor a weary world needs. But one fact looms larger than palace intrigue. Families, not armies, will decide whether his words ignite change or evaporate in the next news cycle. So ask yourself, when a pope who once pawned his watch for rice tells presidents to trade weapons for bedtime stories, is that wishful poetry or the first tremor of a global realignment? Keep your eyes on St. Peter's Dome and your notifications on high, because if Leo XIV signs that letter, history's next chapter won't be written in marble. It will be etched in the daily choices of every living room on the planet. Thanks for watching this video. You can like and subscribe to more content and new videos.